Now, let's get more on our top story this morning, which is all about new plans to make it harder to buy a knife online in the wake of the Southport attack. Axel Rudikabana, who has admitted killing 3 young girls last summer, bought the knife he used from Amazon when he was just 17, even though existing laws should prohibit this.
Amazon says it takes its responsibility around the sale of all age-restricted items, including bladed products, extremely seriously, and it's launched an investigation. Under the proposals, buyers will be asked to submit an identity document like a passport and record a live video to prove their age.
Now, all of this comes after the Prime Minister warned the UK faces a new threat from extreme violence carried out by what he described as loners, misfits, young men in their bedrooms. Axel Rudikabana had trawled the internet for extreme violent content before carrying out the murders. And we can talk now to Adam Hadley, who's the founder and executive director of Tech Against Terrorism. That's a public-private partnership dedicated to disrupting terrorists online. Morning, Adam. Maybe you can explain a little bit more about what your organisation does and what kind of firms you work with.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for the invitation today. At Tech Against Terrorism, we work with governments and tech platforms to find terrorist content online and have it reported so this content is removed or referred to the police if there's threat to life.
And that's all the big tech platforms, is it, that you work with?
Yeah, the big ones and also increasingly small platforms that are used by hardcore terrorists. So yeah, we aim to bridge the gap between government and platforms because there's just so much content out there. Often they need some support to find this and report it properly.
And is this kind of material available pretty much across the board, or are there some platforms, some providers who are much more worse at kind of rooting it out?
Well, unfortunately, a few years ago, we thought that this had largely been solved. But over the past couple of years, and the last 12 months in particular, quite a lot of terrorist content has sort of gone back onto major social media platforms. So it's a big problem. And we're really looking forward to the implementation of the Online Safety Act so that platforms can be held to account more effectively.
Well, is that going to do any good? Because the current Technology Secretary, Peter Carl, himself has said that that bill is unsatisfactory. It's being supported by the government now because it was voted through by the last government, but he doesn't think really the restrictions it's going to provide are tight enough.
Well, yeah, I think there's a fair debate about the extent to which the Online Safety Act may need to be updated. I think the biggest problem is there's so much harmful content online, terrorist content, child sexual abuse material, that the authorities really struggle to find all of this. And we argue that the police need more resource to find this material because increasingly platforms are not being particularly proactive and they're leaving this content up there for far too long.
What is driving that? I'll be honest, I find it hard to get my head around, but presumably it is in part in response to demand, but is the way that the algorithms work driving that demand? Can you sort of unpick that for us?
Yeah, well, as I'm sure we've all experienced on social media, sometimes things can be recommended to us that are pretty unsavory. The problem is that a lot of big social media platforms are profiting from polarization. The more extreme, the more emotive the content, the more engagement there is. And, if we engage with that content and click on it, that's more advertising revenue. So unfortunately, a lot of the algorithms that large social media platforms use kind of unwittingly promote quite awful content often. And increasingly, we at Tech Against Terrorism, we don't necessarily search for terrorist content. We will try to use the algorithms to refer this content to us, and then we will then report it. So actually, these algorithms now are so powerful. So much of this content is just being forwarded to people, and perhaps this is why there's this increased problem with youth radicalisation in the country.
Maybe part of it, certainly. And yet we're entering an environment now where free speech is the most important thing, that barriers to that kind of content are being removed. How much does that worry you?
Well, I think what worries us is that the debate is getting quite confused because actually there's a big problem with really obvious terrorist content on the internet. The same with child sexual abuse material. So, there's a legitimate debate about free speech, but terrorist content is not free speech. Bomb making manuals are abundant on the internet. That's not free speech. So I think, in this debate, it's really important to focus on the worst content because there's so much of it. These days. You can find this material within seconds if you know where you're looking. It's really worrying.
So there's some stuff, obviously, that's absolute no-brainer. There's no way this kind of stuff could be. Of course, yeah.
Yeah, with like terrorist logos on there, a lot of it is so obvious.
Yeah.
Which is really what's worrying. A few years ago, a lot of this content was a lot harder to find, but actually it's just going back onto major social media platforms. So Ofcom are really going to have a difficult job as and when the Online Safety Act comes into place, because there's so much of this content and it's going to be really hard for them to find all of it.
It is tricky though, because as you say, there's the stuff that's obvious. There is a bit of a blurring of the lines. There was a lot of talk about Elon Musk's gesture, which some people are on social media insisting to me was absolutely a Nazi salute. Others have described it a Roman salute. He's denied all of that. He said it was just a sort of heartfelt gesture to the crowd. But when you get that blurring of imagery that has allusions to extremism in the past from the head of one of the biggest tech companies in the world, that is problematic, isn't it?
Well, I think tech platforms have a responsibility to society, right, to promote democratic values and norms. So I can't really comment on Elon Musk and his behavior, but certainly I would say that if platforms are profiting from advertising, they're selling adverts and they're making money from users, I think they have a moral responsibility to ensure that they're doing their part to improve society and not make it worse.
What about this whole idea of age verification? Something we've talked about a lot on this programme in relation, in fact, to the Online Safety Bill and access to social media for young people, and whether there should be stronger age verification processes in place before people can get on, young kids can get on TikTok or Instagram, for example. But when it comes to buying knives, I mean, again, this should be surely standard, up and running. Is the technology there that would allow big companies like Amazon to enforce this?
Well, it's pretty shocking, isn't it, that people can buy, weapons effectively without age verification. So we certainly, commend any changes there might be to ensure that children can't buy dangerous weapons. I mean, it's just pretty shocking that isn't already the case. So age verification for buying knives is a great thing. It should have happened many years ago. And I think what this highlights is that common sense often doesn't apply on the internet. And
well, it's about, sorry to interrupt, it's about priorities. If you can send a rocket into orbit, then surely you can find a process whereby a 17-year-old can't buy an incredibly dangerous weapon online.
Well, this is it. And looking at the Prevent statistics, so many more referrals into the government's Prevent programme are from people who don't have a clear kind of political view or ideology. There's so much more sort of self-radicalisation happening as a result of online content. And the fact is, it's comparatively easy for young people to buy knives online and offline. So the more focus on that, the better. Obviously, it's not just about the online part of this. It has to be about ensuring retailers, online and offline, are responsible also.
Adam, thank you very much for your thoughts this morning. Adam Hadley, founder and executive director of Tech Against Terrorism.